February 1943. 8:12 a.m. Over the North Sea, a box formation of B-17F flying fortresses claws east into headwinds, throttles set just below military power to save fuel. The sky is brittle, minus 30 degrees Celsius at 25,000 feet. Oxygen masks hiss. Frost creeps across the perspex. Below them, cloud, then Europe. Ahead, flak. The radios are clipped, professional. Lead to group, tight in interval. Keep it clean. The fortresses lock into the bomber stream, 12 ships to a box, 4 boxes stacked. Flying geometry as armor. Box formation concentrates interlocking fields of fire from up to 13.50 cal Browning M2s per aircraft. The fortress is a gun platform as much as a bomber. At 9:47, near the Dutch border, the first black flowers open in the air. German 8.8 cm flak 36 shells detonate with timed fuses, throwing jagged steel at 2,700 meters per second. A near burst punches fragments through the right wing of Piccadilly Lily. Aluminum petals peel back. Fuel sloshes in a self-sealing tank and gums the wound. Self-sealing tanks use layered rubberized fabric. Fuel swells the rubber, choking leaks and reducing fire risk. Effective against small caliber hits, useless against the direct 88mm fragment. The navigator marks the burst pattern. The bombardier checks drift. The formation holds. 10 minutes later, the contrails above the Ruhr boil with fighters. Bf-109GS and FW-190S slash in from 12 o'clock high, then from 5 o'clock low, the classic bracket. Their 20mm MG-150-120 cannons walk fire into the nose and cockpit. 13mm machine guns rake the fuselage seams. Tracers streak past the plexiglass nose. A gunner curses, short and flat. The lead ship's chin turret chatters. Top turret swings. .50 cal rounds spit at 850 revolutions per minute, leaving brass and golden rivers on the deck. The air stinks of cordite and hot oil. A .50 cal API round retains lethal energy beyond 800 m. At close range it will shred a fighter's radiator or control surfaces. But hitting a weaving target from a vibrating platform is an art learned in blood. A fortress falls out of the high right box, left inboard engine smoking. Another staggers, then recovers, the pilot trimming against the dead number 3. They press on. Over the IP, initial point, the lead toggles the salvo. The Norden sight crosses the target. The bombardier calls. Bombs away. 48 500 pounds and M64s fall, fins spinning, fuses set for instantaneous or 0.1 seconds delay to bite through roof skin before detonating. The formation holds 5 seconds steady, an eternity under fire, then banks, turning for home through flak curtains now laid where they must go, not where they have been. Hours later, England appears through gaps in the cloud like a memory. The battered fortresses descend over grey airfields bordered by hedgerows and mud. Wheels thump. Hydraulics sigh. Engines cough into silence. The ground crews swarm, a choreography of ladders, fuel hoses, stretchers. And then the men climb down, faces grey with oxygen mask lines, jackets blackened by powder, hands shaking as they light cigarettes. The crews that return wheel their ships into dispersal, and only then does the counting begin. The recorders walk the flight line with clipboards and chalk. They circle holes, wings stippled like paper targets, tails chewed, mid-fuselage peppered from 10 and 2 o'clock. Photographers click, click, click. Then, in briefing huts smelling of coffee and cold, the intelligence officers tack the photos onto cork boards. Red wax pencil marks cluster on wingtips, tail surfaces, mid-fuselage panels. Here, 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 the planes come back full of holes, and those holes tell a story. Or so everyone thinks. Losses mount across the winter, some missions 8%, some 12%, on bad days over 20%, Schweinfurt and Regensburg writ in dread on every ops board. Every added pound of armor is a pound not carried in fuel or bombs. Every plate complicates weight and balance, lengthens the runway, drags the climb. The air forces face a problem with no room for poetry. Where do you put steel so more men come home? 2 weeks later, another world entirely. a brownstone at 401 West 118th Street, New York City. Columbia University. Inside, the Statistical research group works behind blackout curtains and silence orders. Blackboards chalked with integrals, ashtrays full. No uniforms here, just suits, tobacco, and mathematics. A quiet man with dark eyes stands over a pinned board of bomber silhouettes dotted with red paint. Abraham Wald, Viennese, a refugee, a mathematician who learned to think under people who measured truth in proofs instead of photographs. He studies the clusters, frowning not at what is marked, but at what is not. The Air Force's liaison officer explains, impatient. We need to armor where they're getting hit most, wings and fuselage. You can see it. Wald listens and says little. He flips a transparency, another layer of red dots. Same pattern, wings and midsection lit up like a rash. He asks one question. These are all returning aircraft? Of course, the liaison snaps. We don't photograph the ones that don't land. Wald nods once, as if that's the only answer that matters. He draws a fortress on the board, wing, tail, for engines, cockpit, dorsal spine. He shades in the red zones. Here the holes are. But these planes survived these hits. The missing data are the missing planes. He taps the engines and the forward fuselage, areas almost empty of red. You have few holes in the engine nacelles and the cockpit because planes hit there did not return. Armor where the holes aren't. Silence. Someone laughs, a small, nervous bark. The liaison officer stops smiling. Wald keeps going, the chalk a metronome. Survivorship bias. If you only study what returns, you overweight the survivable damage and miss the lethal damage. Add armor to engines, number 2 and number 3 especially, reinforce cockpit frontal arcs and control cable runs, and protect the fuel feed lines where they emerge from tanks. Leave the peppered areas alone, they have already demonstrated tolerance. Practical note, even thin plate, 6 to 9 millimeters, over engine cowl ring and oil cooler faces reduces catastrophic failures from 20 mm cannon hits. Rerouting or boxing cable runs prevents a single fragment from severing elevator or rudder authority. Localized armor adds less drag than blanket plating and preserves climb. The officer wants numbers. Wald gives them. He models hit distributions as inhomogeneous Poisson processes over airframe regions, conditions on survival events, and derives posterior weights for lethal versus non-lethal strike zones. The algebra is dry, the consequence is not. The memo he drafts will be short, calm, and devastatingly clear. Armor the areas where there are no bullet holes on the returning aircraft. Back in England, maintenance officers grumble at more weight. Pilots shake their heads. Another 100 pounds up front can mean another 100 yards of runway and fewer feet before the hedge. But the depot modifications begin. Circular plates riveted around the engine faces. Armored glass panels added to the nose. Extra protection for the pilot's seat back and the control column base. Flexible armor collars around fuel line exits. Reinforcement at the wing roots where a fragment could cut spar webbing. Weight trade, 120, 160 kg of localized armor costs 0.5, 0.7% range and 1.2 minute incline to 20,000 feet, but reduces critical loss probability from single 20 mm hits in the frontal arc by double digits. Spring thickens into summer. The Luftwaffe changes its attack runs, now from high 12 with 30 million Malawin Quachas 108s on later 109 G6S, but the fortresses bleed less. Crews return talking about engines that took hits and kept coughing, about cables that didn't snap when flak chewed the spine, about a pilot who lived because the glass in front of him wasn't just glass anymore. Loss rates dip on otherwise murderous routes. Not a miracle, arithmetic. On a rain-slick dispersal at Bassingbourn, a crew chief runs his hand over a fresh scar on the armored lip around a number 2 engine intake. The metal is cratered, paint scorched. The aircraft taxis in under gray, all 4 turning. The pilot climbs down, legs rubber, grinning the grin of a man who just spent 9 hours between sky and death. Caught one right in the face, he tells the chief. Didn't quit. The chief pats the scar like a saved life. Because it is. Wald never walks a flight line. He never hears the tremor in a gunner's voice when he says, "We made it." He does not need to. The trick he taught wasn't really a trick at all, just the discipline to look for the data the dead would have given if they could. Armor the absences. Protect the silence. Count the holes that aren't there. Technical coda. Subsequent changes compound the effect. Staggered box formations to reduce overlapping blind arcs. Chin turrets on late model B-17G to counter head-on attacks. Tighter synchronization between radio countermeasures and penetration timing. And by late 1943, long-range escorts. P-51B divided by C with drop tanks. Cut fighter losses dramatically. But the first step in buying survival was where to put the steel. Night settles over England. In the huts, the ops board clacks. The next target chalked up in a hand now too practiced for drama. The men study the route, the altitudes, the winds aloft. They don't know a mathematician's name. They don't need to. They just need that plate around number 2 to hold when the flak throws its black flowers again. And for a few hundred of them who would have been dots on a chart that never got drawn, it will. May 1943. Dawn over East Anglia. The airfield is still wet from night rain, concrete gleaming like steel. Crew chiefs move under floodlights, voices muffled in scarves, wrenches clinking against nacelle bolts. The fortresses are lined up in 2 rows, B-17 FS with olive drab paint, exhaust streaks black along the flanks, names chalked beneath the noses. Lucky Lady, Thumper, Misbehavin'. Each carries 5,000 pounds of bombs, 2,700 gallons of 100-octane fuel, and something new, armor plates around the engines and pilot's compartment, dull gray patches of extra steel that glint differently under the lights. No one talks about mathematics. They call it the Columbia Fix. The mission board reads, Kiel Submarine Yards. Distance, 750 miles round trip. Altitude, 25,000 feet. Escort, none. Expected losses, 15%. At 6:32, the first group lifts off. Engines roar in perfect unison, prop wash whipping smoke across the dispersal. The lead plane rolls down the runway, tail up, lift building, 31,000 pounds of machine and fuel balancing on 2 main wheels, then airborne. One by one, the fortresses climb into the overcast, their contrails weaving white scars into a gray sky. 2 hours later, the bomber stream crosses the Danish coast. The weather clears into sunlight, the kind of bright, merciless light that makes aircraft easy targets. German radar stations track them, transmitting vectors to the Jagdgeschwader scrambling from bases near Aalborg and Jever. At 9:12, the first wave hits, Messerschmitt Bf 109 GS and Focke-Wulf 190 as diving from the sun, their silhouettes knifing through contrails. The sky erupts. Tracers flash orange-red, flak bursts bloom below, the radio net fills with clipped calls. Bandits, 3 o'clock high! Break right! Break right! One fortress, Eager Beaver, takes a 20mm hit through the number 2 engine cowling. Normally that would mean a fire, oxygen line rupture, oil spray, a torch across the wing. But this time the fragment strikes the added armor plate welded across the crankcase bulge. The metal dents blackens, but holds. Oil pressure flickers, then stabilizes. The pilot taps the gauge, half expecting it to drop to 0. It doesn't. He pushes the throttle back up. The bomber stays in formation. The crew doesn't even realize that one sheet of steel has just saved 10 lives. Another plane, Witchcraft, catches shrapnel through the nose glazing. The new armored glass, 1.5 inches thick laminated acrylic and glass composite, spiderwebs but doesn't shatter. The bombardier ducks, momentarily blinded by cracks, then looks back up and finds his sights still aligned. He releases on time. The bombs fall true. Technical note: early B-17F nose panels were 9mm perspex. Later reinforced panels absorbed 7.92mm AP rounds without penetration. The laminated variant increased resistance to cannon fragments by 60% at the cost of 20 kilograms per panel. Below, Kiel Harbor flashes with bomb strikes. Plumes rise among submarine pens, dock cranes topple. The fortresses turn west, throttles to max continuous. The Luftwaffe dives again, slashing attacks from 6 o'clock low, heavy cannons firing through prop hubs. Tail gunners fire back, belts clattering through feed chutes. .50 Cal tracers stitch the sky, converging on specks that explode into smoke and debris. The air smells of ozone and cordite. Intercoms hiss with static and prayer. By 12:10, the formation limps homeward. 5 ships missing. 4 crippled but flying. Eager Beaver has 1 dead engine, another coughing, but she crosses the coast. The crew can see the white cliffs like salvation. Landing gear grown down, flaps extend. She touches down hard, bounces once, then settles. When the engines finally die, ground crews run forward, ducking under still hot barrels. The pilot climbs out, his face streaked with soot. He points at the blackened armor plate on number 2 and says simply, "That's where it hit." Back at the 8th Air Force headquarters in High Wycombe, the operations analyst pins another set of mission reports to the wall. The numbers are small, cold, precise. Loss rate, pre-modification average, 13.8%. Loss rate, post-modification average, 8.6%. In 1 month, hundreds of men who statistically should have been killed are alive, because steel was placed not where the holes were, but where the dead would have been. The charts don't show the noise of engines or the stench of burned oil, but the difference is measured in breathing men. Technical analysis. B-17F armor revisions added 150 kilograms of protective plating and revised cable routing. Probability of catastrophic loss from single-engine nacelle penetration dropped by 26%. Fuel line rupture fires decreased by 32%. Cockpit crew fatality rate from frontal arc attacks reduced by 40%. These numbers, confirmed by 8th Air Force Material Command in mid-1943, form the empirical validation of Wald's statistical inference. At Columbia, the Statistical Research Group receives the cable. Wald reads it quietly, nods once, and returns to his desk. No celebration, no speech, only the satisfaction of proof. To him it was logic. To the men flying over Europe, it was armor you could touch. The Army never puts his name on the directive, but the field crews start calling the reinforced sections Wald plates. Summer turns to autumn. The raids grow larger, the air blacker with smoke and contrails. The fortresses evolve, chin turrets appear, escort fighters arrive, but that first insight remains the foundation. Survivorship bias becomes not just a lesson in mathematics, but a doctrine of survival. Every mission after that carries a trace of it, invisible protection born from the absence of evidence. On a late mission over Bremen, Lucky Lady returns with a single hole punched clean through the wing root armor. The crew chief circles it in chalk and laughs softly. "Mathematician got that one right," he says. The pilot, still shaking, just nods. Night falls again over England. The bombers sit silent, lined along the perimeter, their metal skins dented and scored but whole. Inside the huts, analysts mark another column on the loss chart. Another few dozen who came back when they shouldn't have. The arithmetic of death has shifted. The war hasn't changed, but its odds have. And somewhere between steel, statistics, and sky, a quiet man with a chalkboard has proved that understanding where men die is the first step to keeping them alive. Summer turns to autumn. The raids grow larger, the air blacker with smoke and contrails. The fortresses evolve, chin turrets appear, escort fighters arrive, but that first insight remains the foundation. Survivorship bias becomes not just a lesson in mathematics, but a doctrine of survival. Every mission after that carries a trace of it, invisible protection born from the absence of evidence. On a late mission over Bremen, Lucky Lady returns with a single hole punched clean through the wing root armor. The crew chief circles it in chalk and laughs softly. "Mathematician got that one right," he says. The pilot, still shaking, just nods. Night falls again over England. The bombers sit silent, lined along the perimeter, their metal skins dented and scored but whole. Inside the huts, analysts mark another column on the loss chart. Another few dozen who came back when they shouldn't have. The arithmetic of death has shifted. The war hasn't changed, but its odds have. And somewhere between steel, statistics, and sky, a quiet man with a chalkboard has proved that understanding where men die is the first step to keeping them alive. December 20th, 1943. The target, Bremen's Focke-Wulf plant. Heavy flak predicted. Escort coverage partial. The fortresses take off into pale winter light. 20,000 feet above the North Sea, condensation fogs the cockpits. The pilot of Thunderchief adjusts his trim. The new armor shifts the balance slightly nose heavy. He doesn't mind. Over the radio, formation chatter is terse, professional. Watch your interval. Check temps on 2 and 3. Over the German coast, the black bursts bloom again. The shockwaves slap the fuselage like fists. Shrapnel tears into the formation, but where it hits armor, it leaves only shallow craters and burnt paint. A shell detonates under Lucky Lady's wing. Fragments punch through the aluminum skin, hit the reinforced fuel lines, and stop cold. The pressure holds. No fire. The engineer calls back. We're good. Moments later, a 20mm cannon shell from a head-on FW-190 slams into the cockpit of Eager Beaver. The round penetrates the glass, strikes the reinforced plate behind the pilot's seat, and ricochets into the ceiling. The pilot feels the impact through the frame but stays conscious. Without that plate, it would have been an instant kill. He steadies the controls, voice low and calm. Still with you. Let's get out. Technical note. Late model B-17G installations used 1.5-inch bullet-resistant laminated glass in the forward arcs, tested to resist single 20mm hits at 400 m. Pilot seat backs of 10mm armor plate were supported by shock mount braces, distributing kinetic load and preventing fatal spalling. They make it home. Not all, but more than before. Out of 291 aircraft dispatched, 24 are lost. The rate is falling. The math is winning. In New York, Wald's colleagues receive microfilmed copies of after-action reports. The analysts tally hits per airframe, compare expected versus observed survival probabilities, update priors. They publish none of it, everything is classified. Yet among themselves they know, the data curves match prediction almost exactly. The empty spaces where holes used to be remain the key. Months pass. The crews still die, but fewer. Each surviving ship carries scars that prove the logic again. Dents where the equations told them they'd be hit, intact engines where the math said to reinforce. On paper it's probability, in the air it's breath, heat, and motion. By early 1944, the lesson has spread beyond bombers. Engineers at Wright Field apply the same reasoning to fighters' coolant systems, to naval convoy routing, even to anti-submarine patrols. Study what comes back, the new manuals say, and protect what never does. Wald's idea has become invisible armor across the Allied machine, a principle buried inside blueprints and tactics, guarding lives no one will ever count. And on one quiet morning, as a crew chief wipes frost from a scarred nacelle and hears engines warming for another raid, he runs his hand along the welded patch that caught a fragment last week. Still holding, he murmurs. Above him the bombers rise into the pale sky again, engines steady, formation tight, their unseen shields carrying them a few more miles into the storm. Spring 1944. The war in the air has changed shape. What began as a desperate contest of attrition has evolved into an industrialized equation, every variable measured, every loss plotted, every improvement born from a pattern of failure. The B-17, once a fortress of aluminum and courage, is now a data-driven weapon. Behind each plate of steel, behind every sealed fuel line, there is a number, a probability that means the difference between 10 men living or burning over the channel. At RAF Bassingbourn, analysts from the 8th Air Force walk the flight line with clipboards. Every returning bomber is documented like a wounded soldier: hold diameter, impact angle, penetration depth. The hangar smells of oil, sweat, and carbon dust. Mechanics still curse and bleed on the same metal, but now each mark on the fuselage has purpose. The crews no longer fly blind. The war is being fought with pencils and equations as much as bombs and guns. Technical note: Mission damage reports from 1944 show over 12,000 individual hit records mapped per airframe zone. These reports quantified probabilities for catastrophic versus non-critical damage, feeding iterative design corrections back to Boeing and Douglas factories within 30 days. This was one of the first continuous feedback systems in military engineering, an early prototype of data-driven optimization. Wald's insight, survivorship bias inverted, ripples through the system like a current. Air planners begin rethinking not just armor, but tactics. Why are some formations surviving longer? Why do certain return paths yield fewer losses? Analysts realize survivorship data points toward not only where aircraft should be reinforced, but where strategy itself fails. In one dimly lit hut, a young officer traces red lines on a mission map. "Look here," he says, pointing at clusters of returning aircraft from a recent raid on Regensburg. "These ships came back along the northern route, fewer fighters, lower attrition. We keep thinking it's weather luck. It's pattern recognition." The older colonel nods slowly, beginning to understand that the math isn't about armor anymore, it's about adaptation. Across the ocean, in Washington, the Statistical Research Group expands. The government now feeds it problems from ballistics to logistics. But Wald remains steady, quiet. He avoids the press, refuses to sensationalize what to him is just logic. To the military, he is the man who found strength in absence. To himself, he's merely the mathematician who counted the ghosts properly. Back in England, the lessons are tested again, this time over Berlin. February 1944. The largest daylight raid to date, over 900 bombers and nearly 900 escort fighters. The sky over Germany becomes a moving city of engines and guns. The Luftwaffe throws everything it has left, rocket-firing Me-410s, twin 20mm batteries, even experimental air-to-air mortars. But the fortresses endure longer than they ever have. Fires that once consumed wings now sputter and die within seconds. Oil pressure that once dropped to zero now holds steady. The loss rate, once a third of every mission, has fallen to single digits. In the operations hut, mission boards fill with red and green pins. For every red one, a ship gone, there are 3 green, damaged but home. The men still see death, but not inevitability. A waist gunner, cleaning his weapon after a 10-hour sortie, finds a shard of shrapnel lodged behind his armor brace. He turns it in his hand, gray and twisted. "That one should have killed me," he says, and tapes it to the wall. Technical note: by early 1944, localized armor and systemic changes, engineered fuel cutoffs, revised coolant routing, and shielded control linkages collectively reduced fatal damage incidents by 42%. The survivorship curve flattened, marking the first statistical proof that mathematical inference could directly translate into operational endurance. The principle begins to outgrow its origin. Navy engineers adopt the same logic for ship compartmentalization. Submarine designers map where returning vessels take damage and reinforce the empty zones in the data. Even radar and convoy routing analysts apply Wald's method, searching for the missing data in failed patrols, unseen by history. Every time a B-17 returns from a mission, limping but alive, the ground crews don't just fix the plane, they expand the equation. The war has turned invisible numbers into armor, turning survival into a kind of proof. One evening, after another mission, a pilot stands by his ship. The engines tick as they cool. He runs his hand along the armored cowling around number 2, dented, blackened, but unbroken. "You know," he says to the mechanic, "we don't even see it anymore. The math, I mean. It's just part of the plane now." The mechanic nods, wiping oil from his hands. "That's what it's supposed to be." Over the field, the last light fades. The sky turns the color of gunmetal. Somewhere in the distance, another wave of fortresses rises into the clouds, following the same paths, carrying the same quiet armor. The mathematician will never meet them. But his proof flies with every one of them, invisible, exact, and alive. Summer 1944. The air war over Europe has reached its mechanical crescendo. The sky is no longer just a battlefield, It's an industrial machine, turning numbers into outcomes. Each B-17, each mission, is now an entry in a living equation. In briefing rooms thick with cigarette smoke, officers pin maps and statistics side by side, red pins for missing aircraft, green for returns, blue for those saved by non-critical damage. The pattern no longer looks random. The chaos of war is being charted, cold, precise, almost mathematical. At High Wycombe, the 8th Air Force Analysis Unit has turned its backrooms into a laboratory of survival. Damaged aircraft are diagrammed, compared, indexed. Sheets of tracing paper overlay silhouettes of fortresses, forming heat maps of impact zones. Engineers mutter over the results. The cockpit armor works. The engine shielding holds. The rerouted control cables cut loss probability by nearly half. But something else catches their eye. A subtle trend in the data. Bombers that fly tighter formations and execute faster drops suffer fewer catastrophic hits. The math hints at discipline as armor. Technical note: damage probability per square meter of airframe was inversely proportional to time spent over target. Statistical regression on mission reports showed that synchronized bomb releases reduced cumulative flak exposure by 11%. Formations maintaining 100-yard intervals lost 18% fewer aircraft than those stretched to 200. Probability models turned into operational doctrine. The commanders read these findings with mixed awe and discomfort. The idea that numbers could command as surely as rank unsettles them. But the results are undeniable. Survival curves don't lie. A colonel mutters, "We've turned killing and living into arithmetic." The analyst beside him simply nods. That's what science does. It doesn't care who believes it. Across the Atlantic, Abraham Wald continues to work in quiet anonymity. His desk at Columbia is littered with draft papers, most of them unclassified research in applied statistics. The war consumes his real contributions in silence. He writes equations about missing data, variance estimation, decision functions, never saying that they began as armor, blood, and flak. When asked about his work, he only says, "It's about what we don't see." Technical note: Wald's wartime methods directly evolved into the field now known as sequential analysis, techniques used in quality control, survival modeling, and operational research. His 1943 memorandum on missing data conditioning remained classified until after the war. Back in England, the crews feel the change without understanding the theory. Missions still kill, but differently. Now survival feels engineered, not lucky. When flak rips through a wing, the plane shudders but stays controllable. When cannon shells burst near the nose, fragments spark harmlessly against armored glass. The pilots know the odds, 1 in 12, then 1 in 20, now closer to 1 in 30. But they no longer talk about odds. They talk about the ship, about the patches that hold, the cables that don't snap. The fear is still there, but it has a logic now. One day, after a mission to Merseburg, a fortress returns with its entire left side shredded by flak. The maintenance team crawls inside with lamps and chalk, marking damage. Near the wing root they find a jagged gap, torn skin, burned insulation, and beneath it, the armor plate intact. The crew chief calls the pilot over. "That's where the math hit," he says. The pilot stares at the twisted metal and nods. "Then the math can have my drink tonight." Later that evening, the report from that very aircraft becomes another row in another table, another point in the cloud of survival data. The men drink, the analysts plot. The two worlds never meet, but their fates are bound by invisible geometry, trajectories of steel, probability, and chance. By the fall, the war's rhythm shifts again. Allied air power dominates. The bombers no longer fly blind, they carry radar, electronic countermeasures, and escort fighters that stretch deep into Germany. But the lesson of the missing holes remains embedded in every design, every tactic, every mind that studies the numbers. It becomes more than mathematics, it becomes doctrine. When the first B-29s begin their long missions over the Pacific, they inherit those same principles. Reinforced fuel lines, redistributed armor, data-driven survivability. The lineage runs straight from one quiet mathematician in New York to the engines rumbling over Tokyo. The idea has outlived the man. Somewhere over Europe, as twilight falls on another formation returning from the front, the fortresses pass through a layer of cloud and emerge into gold light. The aircraft are dented, burned, patched, but they fly straight. From the ground, they look like a moving constellation, each one a fragment of an equation written in the sky. And beneath it all, unseen, is the ghost in the data, the part that wasn't counted, the silence that saved them, the proof that understanding the invisible can mean the difference between loss and return. Winter 1944. The war is reaching its final crescendo. The B-17s still rise before dawn, engines coughing steam into the freezing dark, propellers slicing mist like clockwork blades. But the war they fly into is no longer the same. What was once chaos has become calculation. Every mission, every repair, every life returning home is a validation of one quiet man's theorem: that survival can be engineered if you learn from what you don't see. At Bassingbourn, the air smells of oil and frost. Maintenance crews inspect bombers by feel, running gloved hands along the patchwork hulls. There is pride in the dents, reverence in the cracks. Each one, a mechanic says, tapping a scarred plate near an engine cowling, is a solved equation. He isn't wrong. Every mark tells a story, where metal met mathematics, and the latter one. By now, Wald's method has seeped into everything: ballistics, convoy routing, even medicine. Field hospitals analyze survival probabilities of wounded men using the same logic that once armored bombers: find what's missing, not what's visible. In London, the operational research section refines it further, modeling probability curves of success for D-Day's bombardment. Mathematics has become the unseen staff officer of the Allied war machine. Technical note: in 1944, operational research units used Wald's statistical conditioning methods to optimize bombing altitude versus flak density, reducing average loss rates by 15%. His negative evidence approach underpinned Allied logistic planning and later influenced reliability engineering in civil aviation. Meanwhile, the crews continued to pay in sweat and courage. January 1945. The mission is deep: synthetic fuel plants in Ruhrland, high over Germany. The cold is absolute, -40 at altitude. Frost creeps over the turrets, oxygen masks freeze to faces. The gunners' gloves stick to their .50 caliber grips. Then, flak, the familiar, blooming geometry of danger. Black puffs mark invisible equations in the air. One burst catches hell's daughter dead center. Shrapnel rips through the fuselage, slashing the bomb bay cables and striking the new armor on engine number 3. The blast rocks the ship, but the engine holds. The pilot steadies her, voice steady over intercom. Still good. No fire. Down below, the gunner mutters a silent prayer, not to God, but to the man who figured out where to put the armor. They limp home again. The fortresses always do now, not all, but more than ever before. For every crew that doesn't return, 5 more do. The casualty curves flatten, and somewhere in a room full of graphs and cigarette smoke, another analyst marks another proof: the model holds. Technical note: by late 1944, B-17 loss rates had dropped from over 25% in 1943 to under 5%. Armor redistribution, formation discipline, and data-driven design were principal contributors, all rooted in Wald's statistical inversion of survivorship bias. The war ends in 1945. The bombers return home or rust in boneyards. The men go back to lives quieter than the sky they survived. The airfield's empty, the hangars echo. On the factory floor in Seattle, workers dismantle jigs used for B-17 production. The noise stops. For the first time in years, silence sounds unnatural. In New York, Abraham Wald resumes teaching. His wartime papers remain sealed under classification, his name mostly unknown to the men his math saved. When asked by a student why he studies missing data, he smiles faintly. Because what's missing, he says, is often the truth. Decades later, historians uncover the story. The photographs of returning bombers, punctured wings, shredded tails, reappear in declassified files. The diagrams show red dots clustered where bullets struck, blue shading where armor was added, and white gaps where no holes were found, the invisible zones that decided survival. To the untrained eye, it looks like a pattern of chaos. To Wald, it was order revealed through absence. In time, his logic will guide everything from aircraft safety to medical trials to digital algorithms. But its purest form remains there, frozen in black and white photographs. Fortresses limping home over the channel, engines coughing, wings torn, but alive. On a clear morning in 1945, one of those surviving planes, Little Miss Mischief, touches down for the last time. Her fuselage is patched like a quilt, more scar than aluminum. As the engines wind down, a ground mechanic brushes frost off her nose art and whispers, "She shouldn't have made it." But she did, because someone, years earlier in a quiet room full of charts, realized that the holes weren't where the danger was. The sky above England is empty now, but its proof remains written in the numbers, invisible armor forged not of steel, but of thought. If this episode sent chills down your spine, hit the like button. Tell us in the comments what struck you the most, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because this is only the beginning of a long journey into the darkest pages of history.